Hi, everybody. It's Lisa Colon Delay, and I have a special announcement, something I've been waiting for a long time. The last time I wrote a book was in 2021, and it was called The Wild Land Within. And from that book, I took one of the characters in the book, Evagrius Ponticus, who was a desert elder, who I spoke about in the book, and then I expanded about his life and all the other desert mothers and fathers for my next book. And now my next book is available. It's available for pre-order and it will come out in January next year, 2026. So The Way of the Desert Elders, how the wisdom of the ancient Christian sustains us today, is also by Broadleaf Books. And now it's available on Amazon. To get to it, just do the shortcut that I set up, tiny.cc/elders, all lowercase, tiny.cc/elders. And I'd like to read to you what it says here in the Amazon installment for it. It says that the book is a spiritual exploration into the stories and wisdom of ancient desert-dwelling Christians who show us how to forge faith at the edges of empire. And these were people who lived between 300 and 600, generally speaking, right after Christ. And so these early Christians, few of us know much about them at all. I didn't know about any of them except for maybe Anthony the Great, who was a desert hermit. I had heard of him, but I didn't realize that there were up to 500,000 people who were living this way as they were fleeing from the villages and the cities because the Roman government, the Roman Empire, had taken over Christianity and was infiltrating it. It was becoming corrupt. It was being used for power. And it was a place where the elites and the wealthy and the powerful could move up in careerism up the ladder. And so devoted people realized this is really getting out of control. Jesus was a peasant. He did not want to be king. He was not king of this world. And so as this power aligned in the major cities areas, devoted people escaped really for the desert. They fled and went to exile, not because they were persecuted, but because it was too luxurious. So I'll continue with what the entry says at Amazon. It says, for all that bewilders and bedevils us, the desert mothers and fathers can help us face our circumstances and ourselves. In The Way of the Desert Elders, Lisa Colon Delay asks, what if the desert elders from more than a millennia ago could walk beside us and nourish our spirits now? Starting in the 4th century, 500,000 Christians fled the villages and cities of the Roman Empire, leaving behind comforts. They battled what Evagrius Ponticus called afflicting thoughts, which still unsettle us today. Yet they discovered a spirituality durable enough to endure harsh conditions and self-denial, sturdy enough to flourish in abandoned places. In wise and vivid prose, Lisa Delay introduces us to a cast of characters who were both devoted and flawed. Like us, the desert Abbas and Ammas, the mothers and fathers, wrestled with gluttony, lust, greed, wrath, acedia, despondency, vainglory, envy, and pride. The 7 deadly sins came from the writings of Evagrius back in the day in the desert. We meet the Abba who's been a crime boss, the Amma who once traded sexual favors for a chance to travel, and the archbishop who fled his post because of a scandalous love affair. We learn about the Stylite hermits who lived atop pillars and drew tourists, and about the weaver who prayed so intently while he worked that he wove baskets larger than himself. Delay brings the timeless sagacity of these spiritual companions to bear on our own barren times, offering reflection, questions, prayers, and suggestions for crafting a rule of life. As you can tell, I'm struggling a little bit with reading. Desert spirituality doesn't mean going it alone. It means finding companions to walk with us. With their ordinary longings and extraordinary commitments, the desert elders lead us toward peace, spiritual growth, and intimacy with God. And that's what I hope for you. I hope that you read about these interesting people, but also I hope that you grow in intimacy with God. You use some of the ways that they worked in the world, so to speak, and those ways become things that you can practice, things that you can do that help you along your way. Let's see if I can find the other part. I wanted to read the table of contents. That is not available at the Amazon site for this yet. Not yet, because it's just in a pre-order. It's just a pre-order for now. So I also want to mention, before I read the table of contents, that pre-orders are super, super important. They can set the whole tone of the book, how much the publisher will publish, how well it does on bestseller lists, if it's going to ever get there. But it's important to pre-order, and it's so important. I want to reward you if you order 5 or more copies. So if you order 5 or more copies and you send me a photo of your receipt, and I will be happy to send you a t-shirt with Abba Macarius and one of his quotes on there. It's a really great quote about where we spend our time and our intimacy with God. And it has a little picture of him, and he looks super, super adorable. So read the table of contents now, and then I'll sign off. There's the introduction, and then the book is separated into 3 parts, 3 main parts, and then a 4th ending part. First is the body, and these are the temptations of the body as Evagrius saw it. When you would first go out to the desert, you'd be tempted by the things that your physical body needs. So chapter 1 is called Anthony and the Beasts, From Gluttony to Temperance. So it takes a vice and a virtue each chapter, and also highlights a specific desert elder, a mother or a father who can help us along. Then there's chapter 2. There's something about Mary, lust to purity. Chapter 3, ladies of the realm, avarice to generosity. These are all a lot of the women that have been forgotten in this desert period. A lot of people think that there's desert fathers, and they don't realize there's tons of desert mothers. Most of them were lost to history, and there's only scraps left because their lives weren't considered valuable enough to preserve them for us. Part 2 is Temptations of the Mind. And so that's chapter 4, which is Moses the Strong, Wrath to Meekness, probably one of my very favorite desert fathers. He's just such a beautiful example of transformation, and he had a lot of different issues that bothered him because he had led a life of crime. Then chapter 5, We Abba John, Acedia to Faithfulness. And this Abba was a beloved Abba, and he had dwarfism. So Peter Dinklage could play him if this book gets to the movies. It would be really cool, and he would do an excellent job. Chapter 6 is Anthony's Successor. It's from despondency to hope, and this is about Abba Macarius. Excuse me. Chapter 7 begins part 3, which are Temptations of the Spirit. Pillars of the Community, Vainglory to Modesty, and this is where I talk about the Stylite hermits. These hermits would live atop pillars as an ascetic practice for years, not days or months, years. Chapter 8 is a twist of spite, envy to celebration. And this is an extra afflicting thought that Evagrius added later. There had been 8 afflicting thoughts, but he added envy, and that became one of the 7 deadly sins later when Pope Gregory put them into his own list. Chapter 9, the final delusion, pride to humility, and then part 4 is the ways of the desert. And there's 2 more chapters here that just go into some of the ways they lived, like how were their houses and their cells situated? How did they live together? How did they worship together? What were the main pieces of their desert spirituality in terms of practices and ways of being and ways of relating? It gets into that in the end. Intimacy with God is chapter 10, toward preventive spiritual medicine, and this really goes into what Evagrius speaks about in terms of original blessing. Original sin doctrine came later and was adopted later by Augustine and the empire, which would be very important that you be a scumbag so that the empire can keep you in line. So chapter 11, the final chapter, is called Keeping the Elders Close, a Rule of Life. And this is the chapter that helps us develop rules of life or ways of being that we sort of document. How do we want to be in the world, and which practices are we going to do each day, each week, each month, and each year? And it leads the reader through, leads you through, hopefully, into developing a kind of way of life that's actually written down in a structure that helps guide us along. It's a rule of life is seen as a trellis, and the vines attached to the trellis and up out of the moist ground down below so we can grow healthier spiritual lives. And that's the table of contents. I'm sorry that I've had my words all jumbled in this address to you, but I'm just struggling today a little bit with a few things, and so I'm not quite myself. Thank you so much for supporting me along the way with the podcast Spark My Muse, with the YouTube, which has done really well, and also now with the book. I also speak about this on Substack, sparkmymuse.substack.com, if you ever want to see my posts and other reflections and things like that. So I hope you connect with this book. I hope you connect with me. And if I can be of help, please reach out.